everyone, as you saw at the beginning of the video, we're going to be taking a look at how to make this amazing visual effects shot using Blender and After Effects. Now before we go ahead and get started, I just want to say a massive thank you to all of my Patreon members. If you want to find out more about the perks I offer, I'll have a link to join down below, as well as a link to download all of the files I'm going to be using for this video, so go ahead and check that out if you do want to follow along. Finally, I just want to say that this tutorial is going to be a little bit more faster paced. However, if you do want more slow paced learning, I actually just released a visual effects course going over visual effects advertising. And so definitely go ahead and check that out if you are interested in learning everything from scratch. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into this shot. So as you can see, we already have a scene kind of made up and everything is camera tracked. And the reason I'm not doing that for this video is because I have plenty of camera tracking tutorials already. And if you're not familiar with camera tracking, you can, of course, download my footage and files down below that will include this file. So you can still work along with us. But anyways, as you can see, we have the floor plane defined. Everything is tracking pretty well and looks pretty good right there. So we are actually ready to go ahead and get started. I did go ahead and set up some just render settings over here. Basically just set it to cycles and then all of the sample counts over here and motion blur. That's pretty much everything that I've done. And so everything else we still have to add, such as the CGI and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and talk about this shot. So what I want to do is I basically want to have some grass kind of appearing as she walks down the road. So the first thing I want to do is define kind of the plane where we actually want to spawn some of the grass onto it. So let's go ahead and add that in. So I'm going to Shift A, add a mesh, we'll add a plane down here. And as you can see, it's tracking along the floor amazingly. What I'm going to do is I'm basically just going to try to model this plane out to just affect the area where the grass is going to be. So we don't have to do the entire kind of sidewalk area. We can just do everything kind of behind her. So we'll go to the last frame. So like 323 right there. I'll Shift Z, just move that over here. I do want to kind of line up this side of the wall over here. So let's Y and just move that over here. I do believe I've tried to rotate the camera to match the exact kind of wall over here. So we shouldn't have any issues like that. So what I'm going to do, let's create a new window over here just so we can kind of see the area as well as our camera view over there. And what I'm going to do is let's go into tab to affect some of the geometry now. And with this edge, I'm just going to G and we'll X move that all the way back here. Let's see how far we actually need to go. So if I come to wireframe, we can see I'm not going to have any grass kind of back here. So I'm going to GX. We'll move that up maybe to like right here, just so it's in line with kind of that back edge right there. So I do want to kind of model this out. I don't want to have to deal with all of this geometry here. So I'm going to select this side and we'll just GY move that over there. So now we basically have that lined up and everything is looking good. I do want some grass kind of over in this area. So I'm going to Control R to create a loop cut. And basically I just want to align that basic cut on the edge of this little kind of potted region over here. So let me just double tap G, just move that ever so slightly so it's right on the edge there. Now what we can do is let's select that and I'm just going to hit E to extrude that on the Y. So hit Y and let's just move it all the way out to the curve. I'm not going to get to the exact curve right around there is fine. I might actually just move it back just so we don't have some particles kind of, going over the edge over here. So yeah, so that is pretty much it for our ground plane. You can see this is the area where the flowers and all of our plants are going to spawn. And so that's going to give us a really good result. I actually might just move this area out a little bit. So these two edges, I'll just move this in the X a little bit here, just so we can have some, playing around and stuff to do if we do end up getting some particles in this area. So all of that is looking good and everything is correctly camera tracked. Let's go into the rendered view. And as you can see, we have nothing set up because I have not set any of those settings. So what I'm going to do first is let's set the film to transparent just so we can have some alpha channel. And then we do need to go ahead and talk about lighting. I always like to get my lighting kind of dialed in because that'll influence some other decisions we make later. And so I'm just going to use an HDRI. So I already have that downloaded and picked, trying to match it to the scene as much as possible. So let's just change this to environment texture. I'll hit open and locate that HDR image. Okay, so here's the HDR image. Again, link to download that is down below. Let's open that up. And so now we can see this. What I like doing is, first of all, let's just hide this little plane. I'll just name this the flower sim for now. We'll bring that in later, and then we'll bring this cube back out if you have that already. So what we need to do is we need to tell the direction of the sun and kind of some of these shadows. So you can see as she kind of steps, we notice that some shadow falls off in this direction. So we need to try to mimic that. So what I'm going to do is let's just add a quick plane right here, and I'm going to change this to be a shadow catcher. So we'll go to visibility, shadow catcher right there. So now what that has allowed us to do is now we can actually see the shadow, and so we can see it's rotated the wrong way. So let's come up here and go to shader editor. I'll go and go into the world settings. And this is the HRI we imported in. I'm just going to Control T to add a texture coordinate mapping node. If that's not working for you, what you can do is come up to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and you just want to make sure you have the Node Wrangler add-on installed. So right there, it comes free with Blender, so it shouldn't be an issue there. But again, that's just Control T to add these two nodes. So what we want to do now is we want to affect this Z rotation. So I'm just going to kind of ever so slightly move that, basically just trying to mimic the direction of this shadow right over here. So, or maybe around there. We'll do I noticed it's going a little bit up into the left, and so we need to kind of mimic that as much as possible as well. So we'll do something like that. It looks pretty good. So now you can see the shadows kind of following off in the same direction, and so that's going to be nice to actually match the shadow of our CG. So I'm going to go ahead and delete both of those things. I was just using those as kind of reference. So now what we need to do with our lighting setup, we actually can see what's going to be rendered now. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and make a particle system. Now, the particle system is what we're going to be using today for all of the foliage and everything. However, you can totally use geometry nodes and stuff for this tutorial. I'm not very familiar with geometry nodes, and so I'm going to be using this method. However, if you do know geometry nodes, you can totally apply that same kind of concept to geometry nodes. Anyways, let's come over here and add a new particle system. So plus, I'm just going to name this grass for now. We want this to be a hair particle system with advanced settings on. So the next thing we need to do is go ahead and import in all the models that we're going to be using for the plants. Now I'm going to link down below the asset library that I'm going to be using. However, there are plenty free models and everything online. So definitely go and dig for some amazing plant and foliage models online if you want to stick free. But anyways, let's go, and I made a asset browser. So I'm going to import them with my asset browser. It's this asset library right here. So let's just go ahead and place in some of these objects. I'm just going to place them in. We'll make a nice little plane back here just so we can place them in nice and straight. But let's see. So we'll go to the flowers. I believe I ended up using this clovers. So that, I believe I used this one. And then I want to say I use that. Again, this is like me trying to remember which exact ones I used. But of course, you can play around and select different ones depending on the look that you're trying to go for. This is where you can be a little bit more creative. I think I used a grass clump right there. And I think I used, let's see, I used one of these. We'll use this one for now. So yeah, so these are pretty much everything that I use. We basically have some nice smaller purple flowers. We have some yellow flowers in there. We have a little bit of these wildflowers, and we have a fern and some grass clumps. And so these are pretty much all of the ones I'm going to be using for my particle system. And of course, depending on what you're wanting to look for or anything, just use your own plant assets for these. So now that we have these, what I'm going to do is let's go ahead. I'm going to delete this plane. We can go back to the 3D viewport over here just so we can work a little bit better. And I'm going to go ahead and select all of these, right click, and let's move to collection. And I'm just going to make a new plants collection like there. Now we have everything in its own collection, and so that's going to be very useful because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding all of these objects in at random numbers and everything, just so it kind of populates some of the particles that we have over here. So let's go to the render properties. So we can select a collection now, and let's just select that plants collection. And so of course, now we have this result where it's basically just taking all of the random objects and random everything and basically just placing it on the surface. You can see right now it's rotated the wrong way. And so we're going to have to fix that. So let's go ahead and select object rotation. So now all of them are basically just following the object rotation of the world. So let's go to the camera icon over here, and out here, what we need to do is we need to go ahead and select some of these plants. And I believe if we hit R, and then we'll rotate it on the Y 90 degrees like that, it should be upright. And so, yeah, so now all of our plants are upright. Just kind of a very weird thing. I don't understand that in Blender. It's kind of a weird process. But anyways, it should look like this now. So that is giving us a really good result. And so this is where we want to go ahead and affect some of the sizes of all of our different objects. I notice the grass is a little bit too small for me. So that's where I can come over here and I'll just scale up our grass object there. So something like here. Also, this might be a good time to go ahead and set up the scale. So we'll bump up the scale a little bit. So something like that. And then we'll do add some random scale. So everything isn't uniformly sized. So now we have this looks a little bit better. And so now we can dial in these sizes a little bit more. I think this purple thing needs to be a little bit bigger. And then the fern, I might just crunch that down just ever so slightly. And then the two flowers, since I want the flowers to kind of be seen at the forefront, I'll make those a lot bigger. Just so we can see them above the grass and everything. So everything looks good there. All the sizes look to, exactly how I want it. It looks very kind of disjointed now. And the reason being is because it's basically taking a equal amount of all of these objects and then projecting them using the particle system all throughout our plane here. So of course, in the real world, you're going to have more grass than, flowers, and vice versa. You're going to have more types of flowers. Like these flowers might be more than these flowers right here. And so let's try to replicate that as much as we can. What I'm going to do is let's come over to this down here. We can hit use count. And what use count does, it'll basically tell what object in our collection is going to be more prevalent than the other objects. So right now, I believe we want our grass clump. We'll set that to like 20 for now. This is where you're also going to have to play around with it a little bit. The nice thing is you can actually preview how it looks over here. If you come up here, I'm going to go ahead and turn outline selected off, just so we can kind of view what that is looking like up here. And so this is where I really want to dial in the amount. And so let's come down here. I want my wildflowers to be a little bit less, so we'll make that 2. These are the big kind of purple flowers there. And then the clovers, I believe, is the purple, the tiny purple flowers. I want that to be a lot. So we'll go ahead and put that to 10. Again, everything is kind of relative. And so basically right now I have it set, the grass is set to 20 and then the clovers is set to 10. And so basically that means it's a 2-to-1 ratio. And so there's going to be twice as many grass clumps as there is these tiny flowers. Now I actually do think that is a little too much. So I'll maybe crunch that down to 5, and that's looking a better result. We'll do the same thing to our other one as well. So this one is the yellow flowers. So we'll go ahead, make that 5 as well, just so we're getting more kind of things there. I do want to bump up the grass clump, so I'll make this 30 instead of 20. Again, this is, kind of where you have to play around with it, get the kind of look that you're going for. Also, while we're at it, I'm going to go ahead and just increase the number. We'll just increase it to, I don't know, like 1500. We'll try that. That looks pretty good. I might actually just double it to 2000. Yeah, so that looks pretty good right there. So yeah, so this is where you can play around with all of the numbers, get a result that you want. I might make this 2. But yeah, so I could spend all day, trying to dial this in. But what we can do now is you'll see everything still kind of looks a little bit fake and stuff. And so this is where I want to go ahead and affect some of the different rotation and give some stuff, some random values there. So it's not everything isn't just rotated the same way. So let's come over here to rotation. I'm going to click that on. Let's change the phase to a random number, so something like that. And I'm going to change the random phase all the way up. And so now that looks so much better. You can see the kind of duplication of the grass isn't noticeable. It's actually looking like real grass there. And so that's going to give us a really kind of cool result to play around with and, stuff like that. So that is pretty much all of the look and all of the settings we need for the particles. Now let's actually talk how to simulate it, kind of, growing and walking along with this lady right here. So now let's go ahead and talk about how to add our simulation. So first thing I want to do is we're going to add a mesh plane. And the idea here is we basically want this plane to act as a brush so that as it passes over our plane, everything in front of it is nothing. And then everything behind it is all of our grass clumps. And so that is really nice, and it's going to be really easy to do. And what we're going to be using today is basically a combination of some vertex groups. And then also we're going to be using some physics of our dynamic paint. And so let's go ahead and jump into that. First thing, just to save on render speed and make sure that Blender doesn't crash, we don't need to see any of these particles here. So let's go ahead and just hide them with hitting this little TV icon right there. Just since we don't need them for now, we can just visualize that they're there. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add a dynamic paint physics kind of simulation right here. So what we can do, let's go to the physics tab. I'm going to add a dynamic paint. Again, this kind of cube right here is going to be our brush. So we want to change this to brush. And we're going to go ahead and add that brush in. So right down here, you can see a couple of settings right now. You can see that we have our paint. We have it painting from our mesh volume. And so that is totally fine. What we're going to do is we're going to change that to mesh volume and proximity. So now that we have that pretty much set up, what we can do now is let's go to our canvas. And so the canvas is whatever we're going to be affecting. And so the brush is, this cube, and our plane where our flowers are going to be is going to be the canvas. So let's add a dynamic paint here. That's our canvas. So we're going to add that canvas in there. The surface type, by default, it's set to paint. And so I think you can use this for texture painting, anything like that. What we're going to set it to, we're going to set it to be weight. And so with weight, that's basically just going to add our vertex group that we have over here and basically give us data to tell the simulation where there are going to be flowers and where there aren't going to be flowers. So let's go ahead and set this up a little bit more. So output down here is basically going to output it to a new vertex group. You can name it whatever that you want. I'm just going to leave it on DP weight right here is fine. And we can hit plus down here and that will create a new vertex group. And so now with this plane, we have this weight vertex group that it's going to be using to actually paint. So first, let's just do a super simple animation for the brush. Let's just go into render view. And then for now, let's just change this to be a shadow catcher, just so we can kind of see that bottom connection point. So shadow catcher there. And I'm basically just looking at this right here. This is kind of the reference point for where the flowers are going to be kind of spawning in. So first thing I'm going to do is let's hit N over here. I'll just add a new location keyframe. So I'm just hitting I to add that location keyframe over there. And then at the very end of my footage, the flowers should be, if I G and then X, move that all the way here. Again, I'm looking at this line right here because this line is the connection point to our plane. So that's the most important part of where we're actually looking. So right there is probably fine, just, a foot back from where her foot is. And so let's add another location keyframe here. So I again. And so now we basically have two keyframes and it should be kind of interpolating. She does kind of pause here. And so I think at this pause, I want to have the animation a little bit further along. So let's say up here, and then we'll add another location keyframe. And then we don't want the flowers to ever pass her. So I do notice it's starting to pass her a little bit here. So we'll go and GX, move that backwards. Somewhere right there is fine. And again, let's hit I up there just to add a keyframe. And so, yes, I think this is pretty good. You can mess around with it if you want the, kind of grass clumps to overtake her. That's totally fine. Totally up to you. But this is probably what I'm going to leave it with right now. So once we have that, we pretty much have all of that set up. Let's go and view what the weight paint is actually doing. So if you come to the weight paint kind of setting up here, we actually do need to be selecting the right object. So we'll come and select this object right here, and now we can go into weight paint. So basically we have this result going on. We basically have, as the plane kind of goes through it, it's updating the paint and basically giving us a new vertex group. And so this is exactly what we want. However, it's not really giving us the, proper fall off from the actual brush. You'll notice as we kind of go along, it's, adjusting pretty well at the start, but then after this, it's not really doing anything. And that's to do with the geometry of our object. And so right now, if I go into the edit mode, we can see this object basically has this many vertices. And so the weight paint actually uses the geometry data. So we need to go ahead and add some more geometry to this, project right here. So what we need to do, you can add a subdivision surface. For this type of use case, I usually just end up doing my own geometry. So with that, you can hold Control R and we'll just push our mouse cursor up, something like there. And then if you right click, it'll just set it back in its original position. Now we have more geometry there. We can also do some more over here. So again, Control R, and then also on this way as well. So we're basically just subdividing everything, giving it more geometry data. And so now that we have that, if we kind of come back here, we'll go back into weight paint just so we can see everything. Now you should see as the brush kind of goes over it, we're getting much better fall off and everything is more accurate there. So this is exactly what we want. You can see as the plane kind of goes over our object, it's basically just creating a new vertex group that we can now use with particle settings. So let's go ahead and, that is looking totally fine. We need to go ahead and bake this out. So what I'm going to do is let's go to object mode. Now, very important thing to notice is inside of our modifiers tab, our particle system and our dynamic paint are actually modifiers. And so what's going to happen right now is our particle system is happening before our dynamic paint. And so in order to actually use that vertex group it's creating, we need to go ahead and put that before our particle settings. So we can just drag that up above here. And then let's go ahead and bake out all of the kind of animation of the weight paint, just so we're not having to calculate all of that data all the time. So I can come down to the physics properties. We'll go ahead and come to the cache section down here and just hit bake. That'll just go through and bake the whole simulation. So now if we come back here and go into weight paint, we can see it's automatically updated and none of the simulation is giving us any glitches or anything. So that is pretty much everything to do with our kind of weight paint that we have over here. So let's double click. I'm just going to organize some stuff real quick. So name that brush. This is where I'll start to make some new collections down here. I'll name this like flowers. So we'll put the flower sim down here, and then the brush I'll, put up here in its own collection as well, just so we can, again, just organize everything into their individual collections. And then we don't need this anymore. We'll just go ahead and disable that from the view. So that is, looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and turn our sim back on so we can view everything. So in the particle tab, I'm just going to turn that back on over there. Of course, we can't see anything over here, and that's because I set it to shadow catcher. So let's come back and turn that off. And so now, yeah, we pretty much have all of this. We don't want to see this white kind of surface down here. However, we still want it to affect kind of the indirect passes of these leaves and everything. So what we need to do is we may basically need to project the texture of our footage onto this kind of background plate so that the it's not bouncing up any white light. If I kind of zoom in here, you'll see a lot of the white light is kind of bouncing up on our plant, and that's going to give us some, inaccurate shadows and inaccurate lighting there. So we do need to go ahead and change that. So I'm going to add a new material. So we'll come over here, add new material. I'm going to just name this ground. And then we can go up to the shader tab, so shader editor, and we'll switch it back over to object. So now we have this basic principled BSDF. What we need to do is go ahead and import in our footage. So I'm going to Shift A, we'll add a image texture node, and then I'm going to open up that footage. Now, depending on how you're working, I actually went ahead and converted this to an image sequence. So all I need to do is just hit A to select all of my sequences and then open the image. And since I did do an image sequence, we have to make sure this auto refresh button is selected down there. So now we can go ahead and put the color into the base color of our principled BSDF. If you do have the Node Wrangler add-on, let's go ahead and hit Control T again, and that'll add a texture coordinate mapping node. All we need to do is just select this to be window instead of UV, and now all of the texture should line up. What we can do is let's disable that just so we can work with this. We basically want to get this texture to match to the ground as much as possible. You can see we're having a little bit of like a layering kind of clipping issue down here. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to mirror just so it's a little bit better of a fall off around the edges of the camera. And so now that we have that, let's try to match this color as accurately as possible to the base footage. I can actually come all the way back here and kind of try to match these values as much as possible. So first thing, let's increase the roughness. I basically would just want to eliminate any kind of reflection data that the kind of HDRI might be giving this object. So that looks pretty good. I'm not going to go all the way down to 0 because I do find that that makes the blacks a little bit more difficult to work with. So now we have it matching a little bit better. Let's go ahead and add in, I like using the RGB curves node. And so if we place that in, now we can just kind of try to match these as closely as possible. So with our overall color, let's bring this down. I just noticed the kind of midtones are a little bit too light. So something like that is looking pretty good. And then I might notice it's also a little bit too blue. And so let's bring the blue down. So I'll switch to blue. Bring that down, and let's bring the green down as well. So that looks pretty good and matches pretty well. There's a little bit of seam there, and I actually wonder if we go ahead and desaturate it a little bit, ever so slightly, that might blend that in a little bit more. So we'll add this node here, and let's desaturate it. Something like that. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Again, we're not actually going to be seeing this in the camera. This is just going to be used for bounce lighting and reflections and everything like that, just so we can make sure we have the right colors bouncing onto our grass objects. So that's pretty much everything that we have set up there. Now what we need to do is let's go back and enable our particle settings again. And so this is the result that we're having. Let's go ahead and I want to set the emitter, show emitter off in the render. And then I also want to come down to viewport display and we'll show emitter off in the viewport. And so now we have this, we basically have our grass, clumped and everything is looking good there. Again, this is where you're going to be coming here and, playing around with some of these settings to get the look that you actually want. So once we have this, what we need to do is go ahead and apply that vertex group that we had made before. And so that's super easy. We basically have all of the simulation baked. If you remember, we already baked the simulation. So all we need to do now is in the particle settings, we'll come all the way down to field weights. Let's go to vertex groups, and we have this length setting right here. So if you select length and let's go to DP weight is our little group that we made before. Now it's using that group. Again, it is baked. And so now it's basically doing exactly what we want. All of the red areas, let's actually just showcase that real quick, just so I can kind of demonstrate that. What I have to do that is let's turn that off and this on in the viewport. So like this, and we'll go back up to the weight painting. So now you can see if we turn this on, you can now see exactly what is going on. All of the red parts are going to be our full kind of particles as they were. And then all of the blue parts are going to be no particles. And so then everything else in between is basically just going to gradually increase those. And so hopefully that makes a little bit more sense as you kind of view it like this and how that vertex group that we created is actually influencing our kind of simulation and the look of our particles. So that is that. Let's get back to everything. So I'll come back to object mode. We'll turn the viewport display back off and come over here. So now we are pretty much done with the simulation. Let's just do some final kind of things so we can get it to look as realistic as possible. The first thing I kind of notice is we don't have any shadow or anything below the actual grass. So that's going to give us a lot more realism. So let's go ahead and add that in. All I'm going to do is I'll select this kind of flower sim plane that we had before. I'm going to Shift D, duplicate that. It's basically just going to create an exact duplication. I'm going to create a new kind of collection up there just so we can separate out these two. So I'll bring this new one here and then I'll just name this shadow. So in the shadow one, we don't need any particles at all. So I'll go ahead and delete this particle system. And so this shadow, we do have that same kind of, ground selection that we made over here. So this ground material is exactly what we need. And all we need to do now is let's go ahead and I'll come to the object properties and turn this to be shadow catcher. And so now you can see we're actually having some shadows and everything affecting over here. So we're finally in the home stretch now. We just need to render out the CG and then go into the compositing. So I'm not going to be doing any of my compositing inside of Blender. I find Blender compositing, it really isn't the best compared to some of the other options out there. What I want to do is I want to basically take this inside of After Effects. So let's go ahead and go into the compositing tab. Gonna hit use nodes just so we can see everything. And I want to render out two separate passes. I want one pass where it's just our kind of grass and everything there. And then I want a separate pass where it's just the shadow. And so what I can do is come out to layout tab. Let's make a new view layer. So first of all, let's name this one. I'll name this grass and then we'll make a duplicate. So add a new view layer. We'll name this one shadow. So now that we have everything kind of broken up in its own kind of collections up here, it's going to make this process super easy because now we just need to turn off and on our collections in order to get the result that we want. So first of all, we'll delete the brush collection. We don't need that anymore. And then now we can see that we have this. This is our shadow view layer. So what I want to do is let's enable some filters up here. So I'm going to enable the indirect only filter. And so what that's going to allow us to do is basically we can tell each collection to only indirectly affect the other collections. So since we only want the shadow in our scene, we can tell the flowers to go ahead and indirect only. And so indirect only affects things such as reflections, shadows, ambient occlusion, all of that type of stuff. So that's exactly what we want. Now we can just see that we have all of our shadows kind of being populated down here. So that is good. Next, let's go into our original grass kind of collection over here. And then all I want to do is I just want to do the opposite. So the shadow is now our indirect only right there. And so that looks pretty good and is giving us the exact result that we want. One thing I do kind of want to play around with is maybe the size of the smaller flowers. And so let's come back out to the 3D viewport. And so let's come over here and we'll select these flowers and these flowers. I just want these to be a little bit more noticeable. We'll ask to scale these up. There we go. Now we can start to see more of the flowers in our actual kind of collection and stuff here. So that looks much better. So yeah, so we are pretty much ready to go ahead and render this thing out. Okay, so that's pretty much everything inside Blender. Let's go ahead and render out this CGI. So in Compositing, up here, let's duplicate this, and this is our grass. Let's change it to shadow. So now we have basically two render layers that we're going to render out as different passes. In order to render out multiple passes at the same time, I like using the file output node. And if I come up to node and then we'll go down to properties, this node basically just acts as a duplicate of the composite node. But now what we can do is add another input. And so now we can have two inputs going at the same time. So we're not wasting any time having to re-render out the scene twice. So let's go ahead. I'm going to put the grass collection in the first one, and we'll put the shadow view layer in the second one. Let's just name this grass. I like putting an underscore at the very end just because it's going to have a frame number. And so that frame number is going to be after the underscore, just separating out the name there. Finally, let's add a shadow underscore right there. I'm going to be saving this as PNG with RGBA, so we have an alpha channel, just because it's going to be so easy and so fast to render out. I don't think we need any of the extra data that comes with EXR. So now that we have all of that set up, you do want to make sure you're saving it in a new kind of folder location. So just select that in the base kind of file path here. And now that we have that set up, we pretty much have everything done and set up. This is where you would put in the final render settings over here, making sure you have the max sample count that your computer can handle and all of this kind of stuff over here. Motion blur is turned on. We are working in the AGX view transform, which is good. So yeah, I think that is pretty much everything set up, and we are ready to go. So let's go and do a test render. I always like to do a test render no matter what I'm doing. So let's come to like 139 is fine. We'll render an image, and again, this is just where I'm making sure all of our passes are set up correctly. Okay, so once it's finished, let's exit out of here, go into Compositing, and then if I shift control and then click the image socket, it'll add a viewer node, and then if I hit V, it'll just kind of zoom out there. So yeah, so I'm basically just looking at these two separate passes, and everything is looking pretty good. We have the kind of shadow pass down here that has our alpha channel baked into it, so we can do some kind of cool compositing with that. And then our kind of grass main beauty pass down here. I'm not going to bother rendering out as different passes such as, reflection, ambient occlusion, all of that separate stuff. I'm just going to save it as kind of one big beauty pass, if you will, there. So yeah, so we pretty much have everything set up. This is where you want to do multiple kind of renders throughout the timeline just to make sure everything is looking good down there. You might also want to go ahead and just play it a few times, give it a few watches, because this is going to take a little bit to render. So you just want to make sure you get out everything you can the first time as you're rendering. And so yeah, so we have pretty much everything set up. We can go ahead and come up and render the animation. Okay, so set that up to render overnight or however you want to do that there. It is going to take a little bit, especially if you have a mid to low end machine, just to render out those frames. So again, just let that kind of render overnight, if you will. But once that is finished rendering, you should get a folder that looks like this. We basically have a pass for our grass. And then if we scroll all the way down, we also have our shadow passes in here as well. Now, I do recommend you go and kind of put them in their own individual folders because it'll make the import process a little bit easier inside of After Effects. But anyways, we are done with Blender, so we can go ahead and exit out of that. And let's go ahead and open up After Effects. Okay, so inside of After Effects, we are ready to import in everything. So let's import in our image sequence first. So that is the original footage right there. And then let's go ahead and import in our CGI passes we just made. So again, I do recommend making it its own folder because once you have that, we can literally take these and drag and drop these into our file system over here. So we have all of these. The frame rate is correct. It is originally shot in a 30 FPS. However, if you're ever having trouble with that, you can right click and go to interpret footage, go to main. And this is where you can assume the frame rate of this image sequence. And so again, 30 is the frame rate that we want here. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and import in everything. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new composition right there. We'll put our grass pass above that, or right here, if I can place that right. So right there. And then we'll place our shadow in between there. So just in the middle of those two. And so yeah, so this is basically everything that we have set up now. We basically have the grass and the shadow in on top of our footage. And so the first thing that you'll notice is that we actually have the CGI going above our kind of lady right there. So we need to cut her out. And then also we have a few kind of compositing things that we can make it look a little bit more interesting and realistic down here. So first thing I want to do is I want to cut out this lady dancing. And so I'm not going to be going over the exact kind of process I did in order to do that, since there are a ton of tutorials out there for that, but the entire kind of process revolves around duplicating your layer. And then if you double click inside there, it'll just go into this new kind of view layer up here, just so we're only soloing out this layer. And then all we're going to be using up here is the Rotobrush tool. And so Rotobrush, if you don't know, is a great way to kind of rotoscope out moving objects. It's especially nice nowadays because we have version 3.0. And so this is where you're just going to go throughout and kind of, you know, hold Alt to delete some things. Let's start on frame 1. So let's go ahead and just undo everything. So on frame 1 is where I want to start. Let's go ahead and add our Rotobrush. And so, yeah, so this is where kind of off camera I did a bunch of my kind of heavy lifting work, is literally just kind of going and cutting out her frame by frame. You know, Rotobrush 3.0 actually does a pretty good job of kind of automatically detecting a lot of stuff, especially for this shot. I was really surprised kind of what the first version looked like, of like how good it was. The thing to notice about this shot is we really only care about her waist down, just because that's where all the CGI is. And so I'm not really going to mess around with, you know, keying out her head and everything up here. So we don't really need to worry about that. So let's just get all of her. She does have like some torn jeans and stuff down here, so that might be a little bit more difficult to get out. But yeah, so again, you can just hold Alt to kind of remove areas there. And so this is where I spent most of my time, you know, kind of rotoscoping her out right here. Now that you have that, you can just go over to the next frame and you can see it's trying to track and do its best job. And it's actually giving us a pretty good result. And so this is where you're going to go throughout the entire footage to kind of cut her out. And so, you know, do that on your own time. I'm not going to do it here since it's a kind of longer, more involved process. But once you are happy with that result, you can have a kind of layer right here, and then you're just going to drag that layer to the very top. So go through that entire process, make sure she is cut out. If you actually went ahead and downloaded my files, I'm providing the mat that I made. If you don't want to do all of that work, you know, skip the hours of rotoscoping, I'll have that provided again to download that. That is a link down below. But what we can do there, let's go ahead and import that in. So I'm just going to locate that. Okay, so we have this holdout video. I'm just going to drag and drop that into our sequence. It is a MP4 file. So I'm just going to place this kind of above everything. And so you can see this is what it is. It's basically just a black and white video file that we can use as a mask. And so what I need to do is let's go ahead and I'm going to make this right now. Basically, MP4 files don't have an alpha channel. So I basically need to convert this black and white image to be the alpha of this video. And so that's super nice and easy. In After Effects, we're going to go to the effect. We're going to add in the channel nodes, we can go ahead and add a shift channels. And so that'll add that to our holdout. And then I want to take the alpha. I'll just select the green right there. And so now we basically have a alpha channel in our video now. And so that's super nice. You can see this is the result that it's giving me. Now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and set up a track mat for our, duplication of our footage down here. Now a track mat is basically just going to take the alpha from the above layer and apply that as a mask to the below layer. And so what we can do, we can select this right here and just select our grass sim holdout. So now that is pretty much doing exactly what we want it to. If we kind of, solo out this area up here, you can see that is what the track mat is doing. It's basically just taking our kind of mat and making a cutout of her down here and then pasting that on top of everything. That's pretty much just what a holdout is inside of Visual Effects. And so yeah, so now you can see we're having a pretty good result. It is a little bit pixelated and we're having a little bit of an edge here. So what I'm actually going to do is let's play around a little bit with this kind of holdout. So I'm going to go and we'll make matte and do a simple choker. And that is basically just like in a road node in any other program if you want to think of it like that. And so it's basically just eroding in our alpha a little bit. Now I'm going to feather it. So we'll go up to Effect and Blur and go to Gaussian Blur right here. And we'll just set it up ever so slightly. So now you can see it's blurring it a little bit. So this was before and then this is after, just kind of blurring that edge a little bit, giving it some feather, if you will. Okay, so that's pretty much it for, the holdout that we have over here. Now we have the girl in front of everything. And so that's giving us a really good result. Again, if you were going through the entire process yourself, instead of doing all of the track mat and everything up here, you would just have a duplication of your rotoscope that you cut out using the Rotobrush tool again up here. So now that we have that, let's just do some kind of final things. First, let's color correct the grass. I'm going to go to Effect. We'll add a color correction. I like using the curves node for this. And then I want to brighten up everything. So we'll just brighten that up ever so slightly. I want to decrease my darks, so I'll decrease that a little bit, and then we'll increase the highlights ever so slightly, just to give a little bit more pop to some of these flowers. So this is before, and then this is after, giving us a little bit more pop and matching it to the scene. I'm mostly taking kind of reference from some of these green values up here as I kind of color grade down here. So that is looking decent. I could probably spend a little bit more time to get it dialed more in, but that is fine for this tutorial. Let's go ahead and add some defocus. So I'm going to go blur, sharpen. We'll add some camera lens blur just to kind of defocus it to the focus level of the actual, real world. So down here, I think it's a little bit too big. So we'll go to 1. That is still way too big. So we'll come down, we'll say like a 0.2 maybe. I'll see if that's giving us a better result. Yeah, so 0.2 looks pretty good right there. And yeah, that's probably where I'm going to leave it. You can see it's just ever so slightly blurring it to kind of the camera lens blur of the actual camera. So that looks good there, and I'm not going to mess around with that. So the final thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to add some better shadowing down here. Again, we have the shadow layer right here. It's basically just acting as a layer. I don't really like having it as a layer. I like to actually use the footage's pixels, if that makes sense. So what I can do is I'll just Control C, Control V, duplicate my layer there. And I want to use a track matte again. The nice thing is our shadow actually already has an alpha, so we don't need to do any of that fancy channel shifting or anything up there. So with this selected, I'm going to make our shadow PNG right there, our track map. And so now basically if we kind of hide everything now, just solo that out, you can see this is exactly what it's doing. It's giving us the alpha of our original footage. And so the nice thing about that, we'll go ahead and unhide everything right there, is now we can go ahead and actually use this to color correct the original footage. So I'm going to add a effect. We'll go to color correction and go down to curves again. Curves is just my favorite. And then we can push this down a little bit and get a little bit more involved into the look. I do notice her shadows are a little bit like kind of almost like red and blue a little bit. So what I might do is I'll push the blue up a little bit. So we'll make the blue a little bit more, ever so slightly. I mean, I'm barely pushing this because I don't want to go too crazy. So that just gives us a little bit more freedom to dial that in, make it a little bit more blue than it was before. So now you can see it's matching much better and, sitting pretty well, in my opinion, to the actual environment. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. I could maybe add some more stuff here and there. Let's go ahead and add some grain. And so what I might do, let's select all of our, or I guess we just need it for our grass, right? Yeah. So we'll select my grass, and I don't know a great grain method inside of After Effects. I'm a new compositor, and so if you have a better grain method, totally use that instead of what I'm about to do. But let's just go to noise, and we'll go to add noise down here, and then we'll just make that ever so slightly up. And I want to uncheck use color noise, and let's set that to like 2% maybe. Again, so it's like barely noticeable. I'll even do it lower to 1% because I noticed there's not a lot of like noise out in the other areas over here. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. That's all I kind of wanted to add. You can get fancy into it and maybe do some more color correction over the entire image. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. We have everything set up and we are ready to render this thing out. So let's come to File, Export, go to Render Queue, and I'm not going to be saving it anywhere besides Instagram and everything. So H.264 is totally fine for me. I find the base settings are totally fine. Let's save a new kind of folder location. Once you have all of that set up, we can go ahead and hit save, and let's render the final comp. Okay, so here is the final result that we got from this tutorial. We did everything from adding the grass, to going all the way to the compositing stage. So hopefully you were able to follow along or learn a thing or two on the way. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Again, I do have a full, more slower paced course down in the description below. I have one for just purely learning visual effects inside of Blender. And then I have one if you are more interested in the advertising side of Blender. We break out some more things in terms of what clients are looking for advertising. So I have both of those linked down below. Anyways, thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.